This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast brought to you by the Genesis Company, coming at you Monday morning. It's October 30th, and it's early. It's early here in Minneapolis, as I'm joined by Wolves beat writer Chris Hine from the Star Tribune, who is in Atlanta. The Wolves play the Hawks tonight. Good morning, Chris.
Good morning. I have a heavenly glow about me here in the Fairfield Inn here in Atlanta. That's what you get when you come to Atlanta, I guess, right?
Yes. So second road game of the season coming up. You were in Toronto last week. You're in Atlanta. You're headed to practice here shortly. So obviously we're kind of like working with a 10-hour window from right now when we're recording to when the game starts.
Listen to the hot takes now. They'll all change after tonight.
So the two things I'm kind of thinking that we can talk about today that are developed in these first two games, I think are kind of going to be relevant themes of the first month. One, is this going to be an elite defensive team? That's kind of part of the word in the locker room. We're talking about this team. It seems like the area they are most confident in right now is the defense, and in a real meaningful, they're talking about maybe being one of the best teams in the league defensively. And then I think the other theme is Naz, right?
Yeah,
we have Naz Reid back in the fold here with this team. We've talked so much about, Naz week last season, and which was just 3 games where you're like, hey, look, the bigs thing works, Naz, and there was, I think we believe that they could get back to some of that they could find it. I think it's encouraging to see in the second game of the season against Miami that the Naz thing really worked, and the Naz thing working isn't just about Naz, right, Chris? It's kind of like Naz working in the foundation of a double big setup, which means Naz needs to be guarding wings. Karl has to be guarding wings. The ability to stay big without a small team punishing them. Like Naz has 25 points in that game, which is, I think, a major credit to him. But more broadly, the double big thing worked when that meant sometimes that Karl or Naz had to be guarding Duncan Robinson, Tyler Hero, random athletic 6'4" Jamal Cain or 6'2" Drew Smith. Like those, that is one of the biggest questions I think with this team, or one of the things they need to prove, is being able to stay big while the opponent goes small. And Naz really took advantage of that on Saturday night. What were just kind of your broader takeaways of Naz and what that means to have that work early?
Yeah, offensively, he looked like he picked up right where he left off a season ago. Like you said, we make a lot of that, not that week, that West Coast week. He looked as sharp as he did during that time. Very encouraging to see. Second of all, I thought the most notable thing to me was when we asked Finch about Naz after the game. He almost immediately brought up the defense. Like he said, yeah.
Hold on. I got it for you right here.
All right.
This is Finch waxing poetic on Naz Reid.
And how about Naz Reid just coming off the bench and providing an amazing spark for you?
Yeah, he obviously does a lot of spectacular things in this game, but it's really a testament to what a great summer can do for you. He's got a lot of confidence. He's taking his time when he gets a mismatch, not rushing it. He's chasing shooters around the floor. These are all things that were kind of new that we needed him to do and to continue to do for him to be successful in this role with the way that our roster is. And, we saw glimpses of it last year before he got hurt. But there were some other things. I just thought his defense tonight, particularly, chasing and guarding and being up and being impactful was awesome. And his rebounding's taken another leap. So fun to watch him play for sure.
That's what you're getting at, Chris, right?
Yeah, exactly. He segued right into the defense. And I don't think I've ever heard Finch really talk about Naz in that way before. So I just thought it was very notable that was almost the first thing he brought up when talking about Naz's otherwise awesome offensive game the
Right.
other night that he segued right into how important he was defensively for them. Big development if Naz can do that on a regular basis, and if his rebounding has improved as well.
Well, it's like it's 2 years ago or whatever when Nas was this, budding something, right? There was this intrigue to him, obviously, just watching him play, and the athleticism. He's kind of smooth, right? Like, but you kind of were like, if this works with Naz Reid again 2 years ago, and he's like on the bench, out of the rotation, whatever, that maybe it would just kind of be as like an exclusively offensive 6-man, right, type of big,
Right.
or right off the third big, I guess, in the rotation. And for him to be more than that, and particularly I think in the context of this team, it's going to require some of the less sexy stuff, right? It's not going to just be those Nas plays going to the basket, big dunks, looking smooth in that way. It's going to be about, for Nas to be able to play 20 plus minutes a night, 25, even get to 30 sometimes. It's only going to happen when that defensive element is there too. And I think Finch and a lot of the players, I mean, obviously we were asking a lot of questions about Nas in the locker room after the game. Like that Conley's answer was like the same thing, where he's like, I wasn't really impressed by watching him move his feet. And we've talked about that a bunch, that's just critical for this team, that's not an area that gets exposed at all. And really, Nas looks fast. Like he does. He's thin.
And that's why, they think this can work, with the two bigs, is because Carl and Nas do not move like your average 6'10" and up player. They are quick for their height. And that's important. They're not just, they're not slow. And I with Nas, I noticed that over the summer too. Like even when we had the press conference after he re-signed, Connolly and Finch were talking about, like, we really think there's a lot of potential with Nas on the defensive end of the floor. Like they've been talking about this now for a while, and so it was obviously a focus of his over the summer to kind of work on that side of the ball, get better there. So I do think that they see a lot of untapped potential with Nas and what he can be on the defensive end of the floor, and helping to make all this work, especially if you have Rudy Gobert on the floor with him at the same time, and he doesn't have to worry so much about protecting the rim when he's out there. Now, when he's playing with Carl, seems like it's a whole different ball game.
Yeah, we don't totally have that figured. I mean, there hasn't been as many minutes of that. I mean, I need to have gone and looked at it.
I noticed we had more. I think we had more minutes with him and Rudy, and then just Nas by himself at the 5, even for some stretches the other night as well.
You asked Finch. That was a good question. You asked Finch after the game. You're like, do you have a preference yet of who you're trying to target these Nas minutes with? And I think just like kind of having looked at it, if we take some of the preseason stuff, it looks like he's targeting Nas with Rudy more. And then even in these first couple of games, but Finch was said we're kind of open. We're still trying to figure out what that looks like. And I think what he's trying to say is we're trying to not pick, right? Because you want to, ideally, if Nas is the best version of Nas, you want to be able to play him 25 minutes a night, kind of irrelevant of who the opponent is. So that's going to probably require him being good at times with just Carl, good at times with just Rudy, and then good if the times he's out there as the 5 by himself. Did you get that of like, was he trying to get away from Carl, or no, he wants it to be all
I get the feeling that they are just searching right now at this point in the season, because you had because early in the season last year, Nas wasn't really in the rotation. When they were starting this all out. Then he comes back, and it was a very small window that Carl was healthy and back, and Nas was still playing before he got hurt. So it's still very the triangle here of Nas, Rudy, and Cat has had very little time, even less time than just, the Rudy Cat thing.
For sure.
So figuring these three out, it's only really been a handful of games that the three of them have been available in this kind of capacity where Naz is guaranteed 20 plus minutes, because like we said last October, Naz was barely playing.
Yeah, right.
So yeah. So I think they're still very much trying to figure it all out.
Yeah, no. And like, but not in like a figuring out like they don't know what they're doing. I think it means figuring out like we want to try multiple.
We want to try
things
multiple things, yeah.
And get there. I think part of the Naz conversation, I'm curious your just sort of perspective on this, is just how popular he is and how much the fan base just like seems to love him. I mean, you've covered closely Notre Dame and Chicago Blackhawks, or Notre Dame football, Chicago Blackhawks, other different teams throughout your career. This was, I mean, I'm not to put words in your mouth, but it's kind of, this is a unique sort of fan connection to a player, right?
Very different. I think the thing that you notice with fan bases is that every fan base kind of falls in love with people towards the end of the bench or things like that. And that's of, that's what Naz was, the first couple of years here. And, we've seen it before where a lot of times those guys that become fan favorites sometimes don't always pan out.
Oh yeah.
It's
not sometimes, Chris. They usually
they usually don't. And this is a case where the fan favorite has now blossomed before their eyes. So everybody can say that, they were in on the Naz Reid stock early, and they've just watched it grow and grow over the last couple of years. It's fun. Like I have to admit it's fun. I'm like, I don't totally comprehend it all, really.
Can I give you my theory on it?
But go ahead.
Yeah, because I actually, so Chris is not from Minnesota. You've covered this year 7 or whatever on the Wolves beat. So like
6. Yeah.
6. So you don't know about like the deep dark Wolves.
Sure.
You were
I've heard stories. I've heard stories. Yeah.
and I actually don't mean this in like a negative way. I think it is a foundation of like Timberwolves fandom.
Sure.
Is so many seasons of it being February, you're 20 games under 500. The only way to keep yourself engaged with the Wolves is kind of to start looking and talking about these development projects or these lottery ticket guys that you're intrigued by. And I mean, man, over the years, there was like Anthony Randolph, you're like, oh, the wingspan, he's going to be so special. Like there was like Mikhail Jelabale. There's all these guys who like came in and everyone is just like locked in on believing in them. And none of them worked, man. That's the thing. It's like, it's never been one of those guys in deep bench Wolves history that's actually like ascended from end of the roster to like legitimate starting caliber player. I mean, he's like freaking Harry Potter, man. He's the boy who lived. I'm serious. Everybody else, nobody.
I never read Harry Potter. I don't know what you're talking about.
You're alone in that.
I am.
But he made it through like the dark magic of like the things have not been able to rise in Minnesota. And I think in the fan base, it's like so many people have attached themselves to someone like Naz before and ended up being wrong, it didn't work out. And Naz, I think that's why he's like an emblem of Timberwolves fandom right now, even more than a fan favorite, because you kind of need to like know the password to be in this secret society of like 20 years, the last 20 years.
The password is you just look at somebody and say Naz Reid.
That's the password. That's the password. So there's just, I think that's what it is. It's this connection to a belief that people have had 10, 15, 20, 25 times with different players that never came to fruition. And this one kind of seems to be coming to fruition, and
It's very
that's the
cool.
connection.
Like it's very cool to see the kind of
Mhm.
mutual love fest, and you see just how much Nas appreciates it all. And he brought up the sign outside of Parkway,
Mhm.
the honk if you love Naz Reid. Like it's one of the most unique things I've ever covered. Like just the way fans express their adoration of Nas, and he clearly is not weirded out by it, so and really appreciates it. And listen, I think in all honesty, probably played a big part in him sticking around. It's like you could go to a place where they might pay you a little more money or whatever, give you a starting role, but after 2-3 weeks, that fan base could sour on you if you have a couple bad games, and all of a sudden your relationship with the fan base
Mhm.
becomes a whole different thing, because they don't know.
Right.
They don't know that they're supposed to love Naz Reid and unconditionally. So I really do. I think that probably weighed on his mind as the summer was unfolding.
Here's Nas after the game, kind of talking about this
Mm-hmm.
mutual love fest.
Moving forward,
How'd those Naz Reid chants feel?
I mean, it's amazing. Like, especially at this level, it's like something that you dream of. You never can really imagine it's something that special. I appreciate every single person that was able to do that for me.
Did you notice like your pregame intro was pretty loud too?
Yeah, I
Pretty
mean,
loud roar from there?
yeah, definitely. That's just, man, that's just love, man. It's like I'm speechless. Like it's crazy because it's like, again, like I said, that's something that you dream of as a kid or something like that, So I mean, it's definitely special to me.
When you were kind of going through the process of where you're going to be next, coming back here, trying to recruit, how much did the relationship you have with the fan base and the love they've shown you play in making you want to come back?
I wasn't going anywhere. I mean, I love it here, man. It's special. It's definitely a place where I want to be and develop. I've developed from year one to now. Each and every year I've gotten better. So there was definitely no reason for me to leave, So definitely was something that the fans helped me with as well. I see a lot of things that I don't really get a chance to acknowledge. Especially, I was talking about one. There was like this sign that said "Honk if you love Naz Reid." I didn't really get a chance to acknowledge that, but like just stuff like that doesn't go unnoticed, And I appreciate all the love.
The mutual love fest, Chris.
Yeah. I should be noted too. Nas's locker in the locker room this year is an interesting place. He moved one over, but that one slide over is kind of a not a hollowed place in the locker room or a hollowed locker stall that he has, but
It's a vet.
the people that had that locker before him, it's the vet's corner. It's where Taurean Prince was last year, in the last couple of years, and it was where Jeff Teague was before that. So it's kind of like the respected vet corner, sort of. So I think that's notable. I haven't really asked him about that on the record, but like, it's just an interesting little wrinkle, I think, in the Naz Reid place in the franchise, that he's kind of got that little locker stall on the corner there.
And that is a thing, I think, from both of our perspectives, is he is a connective tissue in a way of, I think since I've been covering the NBA, like there are different age-based dynamics, cliques or whatever. And Naz, I think, in his whole time here has been, obviously as one of the young guys, but has also kind of transcended that and been in the older guy clique too, or whatever. And so I think, I do think Naz is a leader on this team. And we've talked about this before. You and I have, there's different types of leadership, I think, required on this team. Ant needs to take some leadership in his ways, but because he's a star player, but he's 22 years old. Finch has talked about Cat leading by getting back to being that dominant version of himself, and that being the best way he can lead. Mike leading in the more traditional 36-year-old ways. Rudy leading in, his behavior and all those things. But Naz, I think, is another part of that, and is an example that I think leadership is spread out in this group. And I find that notable and interesting. Like, this is an interesting sort of personality mix in the group.
I think he just comes across as like a very genuine dude. Like,
Yeah.
just in our dealings with him, and I think with his teammates, it's just what you see is what you get. Like, this is who he is, and he plays hard, he plays intense, takes losing very hard. And I think, teammates, young and old, respect that about him.
Let's grab our first break here. We did the ticket giveaway for the November 1st game against Denver. Charlie W won the tickets for that game. We have more tickets to give away, brought to you by the Genesis Company for the game on November 6th against Boston. If you are interested in entering the drawing for those, you just send us a message at patreon.com/DaneMooreNBA. We just want to know that it's a game that you're available for. So again, lower level tickets, kind of the center of mid-court, in the middle of the center. It's section, I think, 110, row S. So let us know if you are available for the Boston game on November 6th. That's Monday. I guess that's a week from today. Again, patreon.com/DaneMooreNBA. Let us know that you are available for that if you're available. All right, Chris, let's move a little bit away from Naz Reid and talk about.
Everybody's just clicking off the podcast right now. Now that the Naz Reid segment's over.
Yeah. That's it. We're done. We're gonna talk about defense.
We're going to talk about defense now. Yeah.
I mean, I think particularly in the first half of the year, Chris, like if this team is 15-9, 24 games into this season, it's going to be because the defense is elite. Because the offense hasn't been
right.
And when I watch this team offensively, like, I know what they want to do offensively because we were at training camp. We've heard Finch and the players talk about it, for the last month. But it doesn't, like, if I just turned on a Wolves game, I wouldn't really know what they're trying to get to offensively. They're still pretty clearly searching for an offensive identity and rhythm and how they're going to be sharing things between everyone, just finding functional offense. I think that's going to take some time. So it really feels like the defense has to be the sort of bread and butter and the thing that keeps them, I guess, more than afloat in this first period of the season. And I guess 2 games into the season, they are first in the league in defensive rating. They held Toronto and Miami to really poor offensive games in those. I just think I remember in training camp that being Finch bringing up defense over and over, and some of the players and of that kind of being the identity of this team. And I think we're seeing that in the first 2 games that's kind of the main thing right now.
Yeah, it's kind of gone as expected, I think, in a lot of ways. We thought, and this is without Jaden McDaniels playing in the first 2 games as well.
Good call.
Which I think is very significant. They look fine on that end of the floor. They really do.
Yeah.
Rudy looks good. It looks
really good, man.
Yeah, he does. Much better than this time last year. And part of that is it's year 2. They have a little more familiarity with what they want to do, how they want to play. Rudy, it's always been kind of a collaborative effort between like Rudy and the coaching staff as to like what they want to do defensively. Like he shares his thoughts. There's a lot of give and take there. But they seem to be on the same page. Finch has talked about, you need multiple ways of defending screens in this league anymore. You can't just be so one-dimensional when you're defending along the perimeter. You have to have multiple ways you could do it. We've heard them talk about that a lot since last year, being a team that can play multiple coverages. They seem to be doing it. And I think what's most notable, and this is, small sample size era of the NBA right now, but the statistic to me that's most noticeable and very important for the success of this defense, whether they're going to truly be elite or just very good or good, is rebounding. And we've heard them talk a lot about it over the years, getting better on rebounding. It hasn't always panned out. However, 2 games, small sample size, all those conditions, they were second in defensive rebounding percentage, where they were bottom 5 in the league the last
2
couple
years.
of years. Yeah.
Mhm.
So keep an eye on that statistic, because if that can maintain in the top 10, potentially, that's a huge win for this team, and just ending more possessions after one shot. And you just see it on the eye test too. How many times were they giving up multiple shots the other night against Miami? It did not seem like they gave up a lot of second chance opportunities. So I think that's very noticeable, very important for the success of this team.
I think that's why they're confident right now. The rebounding hasn't been a problem, and as much as we ripped on the transition defense after the first game, that wasn't really a problem against Miami either. So going in the locker room after that Miami game, this team and these guys were really confident and willing to kind of embrace the idea that this can be an elite defensive team. Here's Rudy Gobert when asked if this could be one of the best defensive teams in the league.
Any reason this shouldn't be one of, if not the best defensive team in the NBA?
No, there's no reason. I think we have size, we have guys that can move their feet, and we have guys that are dogs, competitors. And I think those three things, you put them together, and why wouldn't want us to be the best defensive team in the league with all those weapons? I think we've got to strive for that, and then you add to that the offensive weapons that we have, and the mix between young guys, experienced guys, and guys in their primes. I think it's a really unique team that we have, and we're going to keep working every day to maximize that.
Chris, I listening to that, I'm reminded of end of last week when we talked to Rudy after practice. You were there, and we were talking to him about that Toronto game, which they did get, roasted in transition defense, and it wasn't a great game in a lot of ways from him and Carl in tandem there. But I was really struck by Rudy. I think that was on Friday when we talked to him about practice, about how unconcerned he seemed about it.
Mm-hmm.
And the real kicker line from that was he said about the Toronto game, he goes, I think a year ago we play that way and we lose by 20. And they lost by 3 or whatever it was. I just anecdotally from my perspective, I'm seeing Rudy, to me, seems significantly more at peace and comfortable right now with this group, or just with himself, physically. That's what he's mentioned, feeling great, all that. But I just get I don't know. I wouldn't say Rudy was ever not a confident person, particularly about defense, but it's like the confidence is there, and he seems a lot more at peace to me right now.
I think with Rudy, he's very candid. He will be candid in his assessment of the team. So I'm with you on what he said Friday about the defense coming off of a loss when they gave up 30 plus transition points. Was very notable to me. That I think he feels like a very innate confidence with this group, with some of the defenders that they have in front of him, like Jaden, Mike, Kyle, Nikhil, Ant when he's on the ball. I think we have to always qualify that with Ant. It's like Ant when he's on the ball,
situational
on the defensive end of the floor. I think he's very confident in this defense. And like you said, the comfort level from a year ago, much higher. I think last year, Rudy's big thing, you always hear him talk about this, is we need to have the right habits. We need to have the right mindset. We need to do, kind of those intangible, more mental side of defense. And I feel like he feels like that is locked in. That this team has that, where last year they didn't quite have that, and now maybe that's a difference in personnel. You replace D'Lo with Mike Conley. You bring in a Nikhil who has that as well. So you have more guys, I think, and Jaden has had it obviously on the defensive end of the floor. You have more guys who are sound defenders, mentally locked in on that end of the floor. give a crap factor is very high on that end of the floor, which wasn't always the case the last couple of years. So I think you combine all that together, Rudy has to be feeling good about like just where this defense can be, and the fact that he himself is feeling better.
Right.
So the arrow on the defense is pointing straight up. It feels like for this team. I've been very impressed. And again, this is all without Jaden McDaniels in these first 2 games. And the transition defense, I feel like coming off of the Toronto game, I thought that once the offense gets a little better, and if they start hitting more shots, which they did on Saturday night, the transition some of the transition defense issues were going to take care of itself, and it kind of did as the offense got a little better.
Yeah, and some of that is how much is an opponent going to really go after it. Toronto really went after them in transition a little bit more than Miami, but I'm not saying that you're wrong. I think they making more shots and playing under more control that obviously doesn't matter if you're a good or bad transition personnel team. That's going to help, and I think it certainly helped them. I think an interesting part of that answer from him, from Rudy, was he said it's a really unique and good mix of players at different levels in their career. And when you're listing through some of the guys that I think he's excited about defensively, I think he's excited about this team feeling a little less young. Like that's what I take from that. You know what I'm saying? Like where, we got young guys now, but it's like Ant in year 4. It's Jaden in year 4, Nikhil in year 5, Naz in year 5. Like not that young, you know, there's still maybe players who have more ceiling to their game, but you don't feel the floor as much because they're not rookies anymore or second year players in that sort of way. And I take from Rudy saying those things that like when you're talking about more of the mental things, how often can a 20-year-old player, you know, check a bunch of the mental boxes and the discipline boxes, the things that are so important, that Rudy knows is so important to being an elite defensive team. I think he was kind of frustrated last season with like the team wasn't mature enough to be great.
Correct.
And I think that goes to I think he just believes in the personnel around him more. And I've always been a big believer in the theory that when Rudy trusts in the 4 players around him more, he's going to block more shots. He's going to go for more shots, right? He's going to have a greater willingness to like kind of assert his dominance when he has to kind of, you know, split the baby. Like I think he did defensively for most of last season. It could like peak out at good. I don't think it ever really got to like great. And I guess there's a long way.
That's what they were.
More ceiling to this team defensively.
I agree 100%. And to me, it's the things on the margins. It's the mental side of it. It's everything kind of coming together. I think with this group this season to be that kind of elite caliber. I do feel like in some ways, like top 10 last year in defensive rating, number 10. I don't know if that was the floor for this team in terms of defense. Given all their issues,
feels like
it kind of felt like it was, right? Like we saw what the floor was.
Yeah.
On that end, given all their transition issues, given their rebounding issues, given the fact that Rudy wasn't himself, and they were still able to kind of string it together well enough most of the year, thanks in part to, you know, guys like Jaden and like Kyle Anderson as well. I'll be very interested to see what it looks like when Jaden's back. You know, I think it's just, I really do think that needs to be their calling card. Like you said, as they figured out offensively, the one thing you can always hang your hat on is, you know, defensive efforts should always be there on a nightly basis. And, you know, even if you're throwing up bricks like they were Wednesday night in Toronto, they were still in that game till the very end. I think that's probably the most encouraging thing to come out of these first 2 games, aside from the Naz Reid performance. The most encouraging thing is just how good this defense has looked, especially in the half court. And it's kind of what we thought. Like we thought this team was going to have a really stingy half court defense, and that's played out so far over the first 2 games.
I think it's gonna. My belief in this team defensively in the half court has, even in just 2 games, has gone up. Like I think they're gonna for sure be a top 10 half court defense, maybe top 5. They're really. I like the idea of bringing up the floor of being 10th, which they were last
Right.
season. Like I think that the only way it would be worse than that is if the transition defense was terrible all
Right.
season, because it was only terrible last season when Kat and Rudy played. So now you have that back together
Full time.
for the full time. Could that drain it? But
yeah,
we know they're more intentional about that this season, and I think there's there's reason to believe that's going to be better, which I do think makes it fair to say that top 10 should be the expectation kind of at a minimum for this team.
But I think one thing that went under the radar the other night was Nikhil's defense of Tyler Hero.
Yeah.
I think that deserves a little bit of a shout out. Nikhil's gotten off to a tough start offensively. That hasn't quite been there through these first 2 games, but I thought especially in the second half Monday, his effort on the defensive end was very important to the Wolves kind of getting control of that game. And he was very noticeable on that end of the floor, despite all of the rough things that have been happening for him on the offensive end of the floor. He hasn't let that affect his defense, and he's not that type of player that's going to do that. I think he cares too much about defense and hustling and getting on the floor after loose balls. So I just wanted to kind of make a note of that I thought his impact was significant in that game the other night.
Let's move to talking about a couple of like Nikhil, a couple other random pieces from this. We focus on Naz, we focus on the defense more broadly, which I think are sort of bigger themes specific to that Miami game. It was the inclusion of other kind of random parts coming together that made the Wolves be able to pull away in the fourth quarter. They're probably with, I don't know, a group you wouldn't have really expected to be the group that led them to victory, right? They had a 6-minute stretch in the fourth quarter before kind of Miami waved the white flag once they fell down by like 23 or whatever it was, when the Wolves had Rudy Gobert, Naz Reid, Anthony Edwards, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, and Mike Conley on the floor. And that group kind of ran away with the game. And I think that's noteworthy for a lot of reasons. That's not, I don't know if we were ranking like, oh, let's guess what the 10 best 5-man groupings of the Wolves are going to be. I don't know if
you would come up with those 5.
Yeah. And I think to your point, like it was kind of Nickeil who was is Nickeil in that he was kind of a surprise addition, because I would say in the first 7 quarters of the season, that being the 8th, Nickeil struggled. He was looking unconfident or lacking confidence on offense. The shots just weren't going in, right? To inspire confidence there. And we've kind of seen the best version of him be when he's making some of those open threes, then he's defending better on the other side of the floor. I think it's encouraging to note that he found a way to kind of be inspired defensively, like you said, guarding Tyler Hero in that fourth quarter, even without the offense. That kind of established things. And then offensively, like Naz was rolling. They were finding Rudy a lot in that. And Ant and Conley were out there too, kind of allowing those things to play out. I think it was really encouraging that a rather random 5-man group was able to assess who the 5 of them were out there, and everyone kind of take on a role that fit the moment. And they ran away with the game. Again, I think it was a 21-4 run right there that did it. And I think Ant and Conley in particular kind of empowered that. Particularly Ant didn't do too much, right? And really
he did not try to take over the game. He did not try to go for the kill shot,
right,
as he tends to do. They just let the game play out. And Finch also, I think, you could go back to Carl at any moment, essentially, right? But he decided to just let that group roll. Whereas I feel like maybe last year, because you're trying to make all this work, maybe he pulls Naz at some point.
I was expecting it.
I was expecting it too. I was looking up at the clock. I'm like, we're at like 6 minutes. Carl's still there. 5 minutes. Carl's not coming. Like,
I think Carl checked out with 10 minutes left in the game, or like 9.5.
He didn't come back in.
And he didn't come back into the game the rest of the time. Not necessarily because he was playing terrible or something, but because Finch didn't want to
pulled away with the game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And again, I think a big part of that was Ant not stepping on Naz's toes or realizing that he was going. And Rudy was kind of going offensively there too. There was that one play in the fourth quarter, right at the end of that run, where Rudy kind of finished with that Euro step finish. That people watching the game probably know what the play I'm referencing here, but it was a play where Ant looked very point guardy and kind of set it all up. They called a timeout, and I noticed Mike Conley sprint over to Ant after that play and give him a big bear hug. I asked Mike Conley about what he saw from Ant on that play after the game.
Just on that play where Rudy had the Euro and they called the timeout, you ran right over to Ant. You were happy with something he did there. What was that?
I called him a point guard. I was like, what are you doing? Are you taking my job? So because he just.
I just want to pause and say, elite dad joke right there by Mike Conley. All right, I'll keep it playing.
Kind of manipulated the play from the beginning, and stuff we've been talking about a lot over the summer, preseason, last game, pregame. And he finally kind of just took it himself and said, "Hey, I got it. I'm gonna run this play." And ended up with Rudy getting a Euro step finish. So I was really happy for him, and just wanted to show him that didn't go unnoticed, especially by me.
So Chris, on and off topic, I think over the past few years is like point Ant, right? And at what point in his career do you go to that as do you ever make him the Luka type role thing? And Finch is, I think, understandably been resistant to that because Ant is still developing some of those point guard and reading the floor type of skills. And I think from a roster construction standpoint, whether it be Patrick Beverley, Ricky Rubio, Mike Conley, D'Angelo Russell, they found it important to have a point guard next to him, or at least like a caddy alongside of him. And I'm a believer in the idea that the perfect balance for where Ant is now in his career at 22 is putting him in a position where sometimes he can be that point Ant and sometimes he doesn't have to be. And I think Mike Conley sort of allows that to happen with his presence. Mike does a really good job of, stepping in to assert himself when needed and stepping back. I actually think he didn't do a great job of that in the Toronto game. Mike Conley, I felt like I wanted more from Mike in there of just, all right, calm down, guys. I'm going to sort of set the table here. But broadly, he's done a good job of that. I think he's very in tune and intentional about letting Ant go and do that when needed. And that's a tough job, I think, for Mike to plug himself in and out of. But one, I think he has the skill set to do, and clearly the relationship that's developing and grown with Ant between he and Mike and Ant. I think that's just going to go a long way in developing whatever this is as Ant being a primary initiator with the group.
I think that's a really good point. Something I hadn't really thought of, just when does Mike Conley insert himself more into what's happening offensively, and when does he pull back? And I think it's obviously we talk a lot about his his veteran presence, leadership, all that stuff, but that seems to be an underrated thing, just kind of the feel he has for what the moment requires. And like you said, maybe Toronto wasn't a good example of that, but the other night was, and I feel like sometimes on offense, you could see it, especially I think in the second half of that game the other night against Miami, where offense maybe wasn't quite working. Things weren't clicking. First 14 seconds, 15, 16 seconds of the shot clock, nothing's really happening offensively. And then Mike just gets the ball, calls for a screen from Rudy, and it's just all right, let's let's get back to this with 7 seconds on the shot clock and get something out of this possession. And I feel like they got a couple buckets that way, or were able to get a couple buckets when other stuff wasn't quite working. So I wonder if he's going to do that more in late game situations. It wasn't really needed the other night because they were playing so well down the stretch. But when Ant sometimes tries too hard to make things happen down the stretch of the game, I wonder if Mike's going to go get the ball from him or say, "Hey, Ant, let's try this." I think it's going to be interesting to see how that dynamic plays out, especially down the stretch of like close games.
100%. No, it's critical. I mean, it's a critical thing. Yeah, and we haven't really seen that was such a thing last season too, right? Of this team really stalled out in the final 2 minutes of games. I think Conley in particular needs to be intentional about what the right role is for him in those times and winning time, whether that be and it can be kind of two sides of the spectrum, right? It can be the very assertive or the very deferential. And I mean, who better to make that decision than the 36-year-old vet? I think it's fair to have confidence in that. Last thing quickly, Chris, here, because I know you have to go get to Wolves shoot around. I just wrote down in my notes, I was like, what would be one thing I'd be really encouraged to see in this Atlanta game tonight that hasn't happened yet in the first two games? And I got to Shake Milton, which was, I guess, is a way of saying he's underwhelmed for sure in the first two games. Hasn't looked super point guardy, yet been in a very point guard role. There was, juxtaposed against J-Mac kind of coming in for that stint there where you're like, oh yeah, that's kind of what they needed was point guard in this time. Shake's still trying to find that or hasn't found it, I think, through the first two games. But I think about him as being particularly important in this Atlanta matchup, particularly if Jaden isn't able to go. I know he's listed as questionable, and so this might only be like half relevant. But against a team that has a Trae Young, Bogdanovich, DeJounte Murray, a lot of sort of wing creators who can get hot and get going. Again, particularly if Jaden isn't out, I think Shake takes on a really important role of not just being a point guard or doing things offensively, but being a defensive weapon that can slow things down. Like if I could just fast forward and know that Shake was very impactful in this game on both sides of the ball, I would think that really moved the needle in how likely it is that the Wolves beat the Hawks tonight. Yeah,
and I think if Jaden's back, it'll be interesting to see just kind of how things shake out rotation wise as well. But I don't think it's going to affect Shake. It's going to affect the wing rotations. You might see Troy Brown Jr.
Yeah,
that might cut into his minutes potentially. But you're right. Shake is still trying to find a rhythm out there, I think, on both ends of the floor.
For sure.
So, we'll see how that plays out. J-Mac, I think it's encouraging just from that perspective. The little stint that he did have looked like vintage J-Mac.
For sure.
It's like four assists in 4 minutes or something like that. Right. It felt like the J-Mac days of old. With Shake, I wonder, because they're trying to have him be more aggressive, have him look for his shot a little more than he did in Philadelphia. I wonder if there's a little bit of pressing there, like being very intentional, maybe forcing the issue a little bit, because they want him to shoot more and have a little more usage.
Yeah.
And maybe it's just not coming naturally right now. And that's a problem for the offense in general, is when guys try to force things and not just let it come naturally. So maybe it's like a little bit of like, they want him to be more aggressive, but at the same time, he also has to kind of just let the game unfold and let it on. I feel like he might be pressing a little bit.
Yeah, and it's a new role. Yeah, it's a new role for him. Like what I always bring up is my understanding, at least, is like the best Shake Milton games in Philadelphia were when like Harden was out and he got the chance to take on a really big sort of role, maybe started the game and was asked to, score 15, 20 points.
Yeah.
That's not the role. And probably, barring like an Ant injury or foul trouble, might never really be what the role is, So Shake again was one of those weird bench players where he was like kind of almost out of the rotation or in the starting lineup. So now it kind of if we say he's the 8th man on this team, right? That those are it's just kind of in the middle there, and a new team, all those things. Like, I don't think we should lose faith in some of the things that were exciting about him as a new acquisition. But a lot of at the same time would be wrong to not point out that a lot of the things that Finch and others talked about being excited with Shake, Finch brought up being really good with Rudy. He thought Shake, we haven't seen that yet. We haven't seen really any of the things that we've been told to be excited about with Shake Milton yet. Again, 2 games, maybe 34 minutes of playing time or something like that. I do just, while we think of Shake Milton as this offensive player, I think it starts with defense for him, and being 6'5" with a 7'1" wingspan, and being someone who can harass and make it difficult for, if you're 5'11" Trae Young, that's I think that's where it starts with him on this team, just because it's this weird just dichotomy of the Wolves in general, where they're a better defensive team than an offensive team, but so much of the offense is already spoken for, you kind of got to start with defense and build from there. So I'm excited to see what this team looks like against a different Atlanta. I think is a pretty different type of opponent than Toronto or Miami, where it's going to be a ton of pick and roll. It's going to be some test of those different coverages. Also worth noting that they're also playing on a back-to-back tonight. So an opportunity of a rested Wolves team to take advantage there. Chris, I know you got to go to practice, so I'll let you bounce here, but I appreciate you taking the time, particularly on the road to do this. Obviously, Chris is going to be the only person on site covering this game tonight. So whether that be on Twitter or reading his piece after the game, follow Chris for quotes out of Atlanta tonight. Chris, thanks for doing it.
No problem, Dane. Thank you.
All right. I will be back on Wednesday morning with Chase Frederick. We'll talk about this game and kind of preview the Denver matchup. Until then, he's Christopher Hine. You can follow him on Twitter at Christopher Hine. I'm Dane at DaneMooreNBA. And we'll talk to you soon. Until then, peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Green and hot so you can find me in the crowd, yeah. Don't let standards ever bring you down, yeah.